These are the 4.6 notes for Algebra 2. We're going to start with talking about P's and Q's, which are the possible rational zeros. Remember, zeros is just another word for answers. So we're just going to create a list of possible answers. Example number 1, you have your polynomial function at the top. Your first step is to list all the factors of P. P is going to be the last term. So right here, positive 10 is our P value. So we need all the factors or things that multiply to make P. That's 1 times 10 and 2 times 5. Now, because I have a positive 10, these could all be positives or they could all be negatives. So negative 2 times negative 5 would also get you a 10. We'll take care of that plus minus at the end of the problem. Step 2, you're going to look for all the numbers that multiply to make 2. So the very first term, those are called your Q's. The only numbers that multiply to make 2 are 1 times 2, or negative 1 times negative 2. Again, we'll get that plus and minus at the end. Then what you're going to do is form all possible ratios or fractions of P's over Q's. So you're going to take each of the P numbers, 1, 2, 5, and 10, and you're going to divide them by the first Q number, 1. Then you're going to do that same thing, all the P numbers, and you're going to divide it by the second Q, the 2. After that, we're just going to divide those out and get whole number answers, putting a plus or minus sign on each of them. 1 divided by 1 is 1. 2 divided by 1, 2. 5 divided by 1, 5. 10 divided by 1 is 10. 1 divided by 2 is a decimal or a fraction. I'll go ahead and just leave it as 1 over 2. 2 divided by 2 equals 1, but I already have 1 on the list up here, so I don't have to write it again. 5 divided by 2 is another decimal. I'll leave it as 5 over 2. And 10 divided by 2 is 5, which I again already have on my list. So this list here that I have in blue are all the possible answers for this problem right up here. Remember, possible means maybe, so these might be answers, but they might not. We're for now just creating a list. All right, so our directions here, list all the possible rational zeros of each function. We're going to start with the P's, the last number. Even though it's a negative 6, we're going to get the pluses and minuses at the end. So the numbers would be 1, 2, 3, and 6. The Q's, any numbers that multiply to make this 2, would be 1 times 2. Then I'm going to divide all the P's over the Q's. This will get me 1 over 1, 2 over 1, 3 over 1, and 6 over 1. All of the P's divided by the first Q. I'm going to do that same thing. All the P's divided by the second Q. 1 over 2, 2 over 2, 3 over 2, and 6 over 2. Then we'll divide each of these out and put a plus and minus sign on our answers. 1 divided by 1 is 1. 2 divided by 1, 2. 3 divided by 1 is 3. 6 divided by 1 is 6. 1 over 2 is a decimal. I'll leave it as a fraction 1/2. 2 over 2 is 1, so I don't have to write that again. 3 over 2 would be another decimal or fraction. I'll leave it. And 6 over 2 is 3. I already have 3 on there, so I don't have to write it again. And there's my list of possible zeros, possible answers. Example number 3. The P's would be everything that multiplies to make 18. So sometimes I do it like this. 1 times 18, 2 times 9, and 3 times 6. This time the Q up in front is an invisible 1. And 1 is nice because the only thing that multiplies to make 1 is 1. So if I take each of these and write it, all the p's over the q, if you notice what's going to happen, when I divide everything by 1, I get the exact same list as I had right there. And that'll always happen when you have just your q of 1. So anytime you have just a q of 1, pretty much your list of p-values is going to be your final answer. Let's take a look at example number 4. P would be the 5, Q would be the 3. Numbers that multiply to 5, there's not many, just 1 and 5. Things that multiply to 3, again, not many, just 1 and 3. So you take your list of P numbers, 1 and 5, and you divide it by the first one. And you take the 1 and the 5 and divide it by the second, the 3. Okay, then we're going to divide those out. 1 over 1 is 1. 5 over 1, 5. 1/3 is a fraction decimal, leave it. And same thing as 5/3 fraction decimals, leave it. All right, example number 5. This one's a little bit shorter. Notice we're not paying any attention to the middle terms. We don't care about anything in the middle, just the first and the last. P is 30. Q, notice right there is an invisible 1. So we have our list of P's. We have our list of Q's. And then we'll form our ratios or our fractions, P's over Q's. Numbers that multiply to make 30, there's a lot of them. Let's see, 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, and 5 times 6. Numbers that multiply to make 1, just 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save myself a little bit of time. I know I'm about to divide all of this list of P numbers by the Q. I know that's going to get me the same exact P list. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come down to the bottom and start writing out that list. I know if I divide each of these numbers by 1, I'm going to get the same number. And there I go. And you can do that anytime you're just dividing by 1. All right, now that we have found our list of possible answers, now it's time to actually decide which one of them are answers. So our goal on the backside is going to be to find all the zeros. First thing you want to do, list the P's and Q's. And then after that, we're just going to start checking. List the P's and Q's and then start checking. When we start checking, we know a lot of times the answer is not going to be correct, and that's okay. We just move on to the next possible answer. Let's create our list first. P's, Q's, P's over Q's. P is 9, things that multiply to 9, 1 times 9, and 3 times 3. I'm not going to write the 3 twice. I'm just going to write it once. The Q, the number in front is a 1. And remember what we learned on the front side. If you just have a 1 right there, your final list is just your list of P numbers. So I'm not going to even have to write it as a fraction. I know if I divide all these by 1, I'm going to get my final answer. So my possible numbers are positive 1 and negative 1, positive 3 and negative 3, positive 9 and negative 9. That's 6 different answers that I can try. When I check them, what I want to do is use synthetic division. So I'll take each of these numbers here, 1, negative 9, and 9. Now put them into the division bar. And we're just going to go down the list, checking the positive version and then the negative version. So let's start by checking positive 1. I'll put a positive 1 on the outside. For synthetic division, you bring down the first number, 1, and then you multiply the outside times the bottom. That would get you 1. Then you combine the inside numbers, negative 1 and positive 1 make 0. And you multiply again. 1 times 0 is 0. Then you combine the inside numbers, negative 9 and 0 makes negative 9. And you multiply one more time. 1 times negative 9, negative 9. And you combine 9 and negative 9 here in the inside to make 0. If you get an answer of 0, remember that means that whatever you had out here is in fact a 0. It's an answer. So we like to get that 0 right there. After we find one that works, we are going to write the depressed equation. Remember, the depressed equation is just one exponent lower than our problem started out to be. So our polynomial started off as x to the third. Right here you see x to the third. So we'll write our depressed polynomial as x squared. 1x squared, 0x minus 9 equals 0. And then I'll write it a little bit neater. I'll take off the 1 in front of the x squared. I don't need the 0x. I'll just write minus 9. Then I can add 9 to both sides. And at the end, I'll square root to solve it out. Plus and minus 3. All right, so let's make a little note. Don't forget plus and minus when you square root. Don't forget the plus and minus sign when you square root. So our final list of answers, 1, which came from right here, and then positive 3 and negative 3. And those are my final answers. Let's try the next one, example 7. We'll start by making our list of P's and Q's, the possible answers. P's, numbers that multiply to 16, 1 and 16, 2 and 8, and 4 times 4. Q's, again, notice that 1 right there. Remember what we can do with a 1. All the P numbers divided by 1 is just going to get me those same exact numbers. So instead of setting up as fractions, we can just go ahead and write our final list of answers. Plus and minus 1, plus minus 2, 4, 8, and 16. That's what I get when I divide each of the P numbers by 1. That's a big, long list to check. Let's go ahead and get going. Take the numbers in front. 1, 1, 16, and 16. 1, 1, 16, and 16. And we're going to start by checking positive 1. So we'll start with this very first 1 number. For synthetic division, I'll bring down the 1. And then we'll multiply the outside number times the bottom. 1 times 1 is 1. Combine the 1 plus 1 to get 2. Multiply the outside number times the bottom. 1 times 2 is 2. Combine, add the inside numbers. 16 plus 2 is 18. Multiply the 1 times the 18 to get 18. And add these together to get 34. What this tells me, because I did not end in a 0, is that 1 is not one of my answers. What I'll have to do next is start over again but using a -1. So we're just going to check the next number on the list right here. I've got the +1. Now I'm trying to check the -1. I'll line up my numbers the same way I did before, my coefficients. We'll do this one a little bit faster. Drop down the 1, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, and add. Notice that 0 there. That means that is a correct answer. So -1 is definitely one of my answers. Now I just need to find the rest. I'm going to write my depressed equation. X squared, x, constant, and equals 0. I'll write that even better by writing x squared plus 16 equals 0. Notice I don't need that 0x. Subtract 16 from both sides. And square root. Remember, when we square root, we do need a plus or minus sign. And because of the negative underneath the square root, you do need to have an I there. I's for when you square root a negative. And then we can write our final list of answers. Let's see, we had -1 that worked right here. And then we have +4i and -4i. Example 8 is a good one to try on your own. So if you want to pause the video, give that one a try, and then fast forward to see if you did it correctly. If you're still not quite understanding, just keep listening to the video and see if it helps. Let's change colors. All right, we'll do P's and Q's first. Now already I'm noticing a 1 right there, so I'm just going to go ahead and skip over the Q's list. I'm going to write immediately my list. I don't even need that. Numbers that multiply to 28. 1 times 28. 2 times 14. And 4 times 7. So we did a little shortcut there. Then we're going to start checking. I'm going to take the coefficients 1, 7, -4, and -28. 1, 7, -4, and -28. I'll start by checking the very first number, 1. Bring this down 1, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, and add. That did not work. So I know that +1 is not one of my answers. I'll have to move on to the next one, -1. 1, 7, -4, -28. Multiply, add, multiply, add, being very careful with our signs here, multiply, +10, and add -18. That means that -1 is also not one of my answers. We'll just have to keep going down the list. So let's try +2 next. 1, 7, -4, and -28, always using those same numbers. Drop that down, multiply, add, 7 plus 2 is 9. Multiply the outside number 2 times the bottom 9 to get 18. Add the inside numbers to get 14. Multiply 2 times 14 to get 28, and add -28 and +28 to get 0. Finally, we've come to an answer. 2 is one of our answers. Now I can take what's left at the bottom, write my depressed equation. Remember to be x squared, x, constant, and equals 0. I don't need the 1 in front of the x squared, but this time I do need that 9 since it's not a 0. And this one I actually have to factor. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 14 and add together to make 9. I think those are going to be 7 times 2. My problem has all positive, so I know these are going to have to be positive. Those are considered my factors. I want to actually find my zeros, so I'll set each of those equal to 0 and solve. You could probably do that in your head. You would just get the opposite signs, -7 and -2. So when you make your final list of answers, list of zeros, you have the 2 from right here, and then you have -7 and -2. All right, example 9, our last one for today. Again, notice the Q in front. That means I can just focus on the 15. My list is going to be 1 times 15 and 3 times 5. Start by checking the first number, +1. Take the coefficients. Those go inside your synthetic division bar. And then you alternate, remember, between multiplying and adding. One times 1 is 1. 3 plus 1 is 4. 1 times 4 is 4. -13 plus 4 is 9. Outside times the bottom, and insides get added. Oops, that's a -9. Apologies. And then -24. That's not going to work. So, remember, you try the next number on the list, which is the negative version of the one you just tried. Let's try -1. Line up your coefficients, the numbers in front of the x's. Always going back to this original problem here. All right, drop this down to get a 1. Multiply. Add. Multiply. Add. Multiply the outside number times the bottom to get +15 and add the 2 inside numbers to get 0. All right, that means that -1 is one of our answers, which means we'll take what's left at the bottom and write what we call our depressed equation. X squared, 1 does not need it to be in front, plus 2x minus 15 equals 0. This is another factoring problem. 2 sets of parentheses. 5 and 3 is going to be my combination that multiplies to 15. I just have to make one of them a negative. In order to get a +2, the 5 will have to be positive and the 3 will have to be negative. Then I set those equal to 0 and solve them, resulting in a -5 and a +3. I can then write my final list of answers, -1, -5, and +3.